Welcome to the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP, and welcome to our morning briefing series. My name is Stöckmann, and I'm head of the Kaiser Forum, which is a new initiative here at DGAP for strategic questions to be launched in November this year. Today, we are talking about Russian drones and about NATO's response following last week's Russian drone incursion into Poland. The attack on the 9th of September triggered a quick reaction alert, and NATO forces were able to shoot down some of the estimated 23 drones. The Polish government invoked Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty and gave an emergency briefing to the UN Security Council. On Saturday then, the 12th of September, Romania also reported a Russian drone incursion into its own airspace. These incidents are, of course, not isolated, but form part of a broader Russian strategy that, as Poland's foreign minister, Karl put it, is testing NATO's reactions by incremental escalations without provoking a full-scale response. Interestingly, Gotkowska added, none of the drones carried explosives, while, of course, Russia continues to hit Ukraine with drones causing massive damage, including most recently on power stations and the railway system. What's particularly ruthless, Russia is using Ukrainian children in drone production, actually, as part of its re-education and militarization efforts, as a new study by Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab finds. In addition to that, we saw in the past few days the joint Russian-Belarusian military exercise Zapad. And so this, we believe, is a good moment to take a closer look at the logic of Russia's drone warfare and at the ability of NATO and European forces to defend its eastern flank. And also the things that the German government might have to adjust in its foreign and security policy. To do that, I'm delighted to introduce our speakers today. Justyna Gotkowska is Deputy Director and Head of the Security and Defense Department at the Center for Eastern Studies based in Warsaw. Justyna focuses on German and Polish security and defense policy, as well as that of the Nordic and Baltic states. She also works on NATO and the EU's common security and defense policy. In the past, she's held visiting positions at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies and the University of the Bundeswehr Munich, and I believe spent considerable time in Germany to be able to know this country quite well. Welcome, Justyna. Next will be Dr. Patrick Keller, who since July this year is head of the Center for Security and Defense here at DGAP. He previously worked at BDLI, the German Aerospace Industry Association, and before that at the Ministry of Defense, including inter alia as speechwriter to Ministers von der Leyen and Kramp-Karrenbauer. He also served as Vice President of the Federal Academy for Security Policy, BAX, and earlier in his career worked with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Welcome, Patrick. Last but not least, Dr. Stefan Meister is head of the Center for Order and Governance in Russia, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia here at DGAP. Stefan is a specialist on Russia's domestic and foreign policy and the post-Soviet space more broadly. He's a long-standing contributor to this morning briefing series, so welcome back, Stefan. Now, before we begin, we would just like to remind you that this event is being recorded and will be uploaded subsequently. We will kick off our conversation here on the panel with about 5 minutes of intro remarks each, and then open up for questions after 30 minutes. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand, and when invited to speak, keep it relatively brief so we can pick up as many as possible. Finally, a big thank you to my colleagues supporting this series, including Milan Nitsch, Helga Beck, Karl, and some others. Now, without much further ado, over to you, Justyna. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more from a Polish point of view about this Russian incursion last week and the political and military reaction it has provoked. Over to you.
Yes, again, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. I would like that to start with 3 observations why that was a significant event for Poland, for NATO. It's first, as you said, that citing Minister Gotkowski, that was a deliberate action. We had some incursions in past months and past weeks with regard to Russian drones invading, coming into the Polish airspace. But these were isolated incidents. Also now, after rethinking, that might have been also a preparation for this bigger event, according to the Polish General Staff. Second, it was crossing a red line. For the first time, Russia is testing the ground for conduct military operations under the threshold of Article 5. And I think this is crucial. And we need to understand the importance of that. And third, it was also the first time when the NATO forces shot down Russian drones, armed and unarmed. I think in the Polish discussion, it is still not clear how many of these drones were armed. So it was not the Polish, or not only the Polish F-16s, but the Dutch F-35s that shot down the planes. And this is also significant. So this is a NATO issue and not a Polish issue. What goals Russia had doing this at that time? I think it had several goals on political and military societal level, but I see two most important ones. And this is, first of all, testing the US reaction in times when the US wants to disengage from the Russian-Ukrainian war and reduce its presence in Europe. And it wants to test a reaction on an ally that is close to the US, where the US has underlined that it would like to maintain, and Trump said it during the recent President Nawrocki visit in Washington, that we will consider strengthening the US presence in Poland. And second, this is, in my opinion, also an attempt to influence Trump administration to press Ukraine more to concede to what Russia wants with regard to ending the war in Ukraine, by showing to the US that if it doesn't, the war may spill over and the US will be involved. With regard to other goals, politically, it was definitely testing the reaction of the Polish leadership that has been in a very polarized situation after the election of the president, Karol Nawrocki. We have real public quarrels and feuds between the president and the prime minister and the government. So definitely they wanted to test how united we are in response to such provocations. On the second level, societal, that was not only an attempt to divide the elites, but also the society. And Russia started a huge campaign of disinformation in the Polish media, social media sphere, questioning or undermining the trust in the government, in the armed forces, in the public communication, in the reaction of the Polish and NATO forces. And of course, it wants to instigate the fear of war in Poland. On the military level, it was definitely also testing the Polish air defense system, the radars, the sensors, the reaction. Polish reaction on a political level, I think everyone in Polish was astonished that it was so good and so united. And I was really watching the president, the prime minister, and I was really very positively surprised how well Poland reacted on the political level. Article 5, the meeting, NATO meeting based on Article 5, and then special meeting of the Security Council of the UN. These were also good steps. Militarily, I think we also passed the test in the reaction, how we reacted as Poland and how we reacted in cooperation with NATO allies. That has been possible because of the 3 years of war and different situation, different incidents Poland had to react to, and had to improve procedures, decision-making, and pre-authorization of certain decisions, like, for example, like in this case, the strikes. But the weak spot, surprisingly, is the Polish society. Polish society is also prone to Russian disinformation, diffusing what has happened, who was responsible, and whether Polish reaction, NATO reaction was appropriate. And I see I think this has been a weak spot in all that. And what is next? I think we need to prepare for more such incursions and more such Russian actions because of the uncertainty of the US political and military course. Russia will test us further because it wants to influence the US, it wants to move the borders, and it doesn't see very strong US reactions. And this is a problem that we are seeing also in Poland, both politically, where the US representative said that it might have been an accident and there was no military gesture in response directly to this incident from the US. And last point, I think this incident will have to make us rethink deterrence vis-a-vis the threats under the threshold of Article 5. And I think that defensive reaction strategy, even it has been a good one overall by NATO, will not be enough. And we need to think about offensive actions needed to show that to Russia that such behavior has consequences. These might be economic sanctions. This might be arming Ukraine with weapons with which Ukraine could strike Russian drone facilities and others in a more effective manner. And I think we need to think and discuss on what Russia fears most. And I think Russian propaganda shows that to us, meaning shooting down Russian drones, Russian missiles by NATO forces from our territory in the Ukrainian airspace. And I will here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Justyna. That was extremely helpful to understand things from a Polish point of view. And I'd love to come back to that in the Q&A, especially this issue of Polish society sticking together in this moment or not, being very polarized, because I think Poland is not alone in this sense in Europe. But for now, your other point, being prepared for what's coming from Russia, is, I think, a perfect segue into Patrick's opening remarks. Perhaps, Patrick, you could help us to contextualize these most recent drone incursions in the more general military logic and how NATO and Germany in particular should respond.
Yes, I will try to do so. Thank you, Jan. Thank you for having me in this broadcast. It's an honor to speak alongside two such excellent colleagues on the matter, and I'm delighted to see such interest in our format here today. So I will just maybe try and introduce three aspects that can serve then as a starting point for our debate here among the panel, but especially with all of you in the audience. Building on the things that Justyna just said, the first point that I find is important to discuss is, from a military point of view, the question of effectiveness and sustainability. We are speaking of 23 drones. Maybe a little more than a handful of them were actually shot down in a defensive matter. It's unclear how successful actually our defenses were in that regard. But what is clear, Justyna just mentioned it, is that they were shot down by fighter jets or missiles. And it's, of course, a problematic thing to shoot down very cheaply built drones with multi-million-dollar aircraft and ammunition. When faced with this question, the SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, said, well, he doesn't want his soldiers to think about money when they defend our territory, which I think is the correct attitude for the military leadership. But for the political leadership and for the sustainability of our effort, I think this points very clearly to the fact that we are not where we need to be when it comes to countering drone attacks, both in detection and in actually destroying those objects. And I think what this means is that we need to get serious in our procurement in Germany, but also all across the alliance when it comes to achieving the right mix of capabilities for our armed forces, introducing more adequate and sustainable measures alongside the legacy systems that we need to continue to buy as well. So that's the first point on effectiveness and sustainability of our defensive effort. The second point is on NATO's reaction. As you know, NATO activated the Eastern Sentry activity, the permanent activity in response to this incursion. This activity was planned anyhow, also in part in reaction to the Zapad exercise, which I believe Stefan will talk about a little bit. But it was now activated earlier, and it is in effect from now on. And the purpose of Eastern Century, of NATO's effort there, is to strengthen the defenses all along the eastern flank, from the Baltics down to Turkey and the Black Sea. Not all of the elements of this effort are public, but some of them are known and have been discussed in the media as well. There have been certain fighter jets that contributed to Eastern Century by Denmark, by France, also by Germany, 4 Eurofighters, maybe 2. We will see how many actually will take part in it then in the end. But also other countries, Italy, Sweden, Spain, the UK, they all contribute to this strengthening of our defenses and our credible deterrence alongside the eastern flank. One can discuss how useful these measures really are, whether these are just, capabilities that were there, because it was their turn to be there anyhow, or whether there's actually an increase in our credible deterrence. One can discuss this at detail, but mostly behind closed doors, because the actual capabilities are not known, not fully known at least. But what is even more important, I think, is that this sends a political signal. As Justyna just said, it is important that the alliance shows that they react to Putin's testing of our resolve, and that they actually contribute military capabilities, put them into effect, and that many of them do. I think in our conversation we can discuss a little bit more the role of the United States in that. What is evident to me is that's important that we Europeans, Germany especially, are contributing on that level militarily, but also in our political statements of condemning Russian action. Third point that I find relevant is, and Justyna hinted at that, what does Putin aim to achieve? What do the Russians try to do by testing the airspace and the resolve of NATO allies and NATO territory? I fear that it's not just a building up of, testing what we can do of, as Radek Sikorski said, incremental escalations. That is part of it. But the effect of it, I believe, is even more dangerous, because the effect is that it starts to undermine our conversations about what constitutes Article 5. What do the Russians actually need to do for NATO to invoke Article 5 to say it's an attack against all and we will respond collectively to this attack? By testing the waters like the Russians are doing now with this drone incident, what they are in fact doing is making Article 5 a more cumulative thing rather than a one-time action where we can say, well, now they crossed the red line, now we need to react. What is happening now is that we start measuring and discussing, well, is that enough? Does it add up to something more than it seems to be? Is it not enough? Do we stay at Article 4 discussions or not? So in effect, it shows that NATO needs to have a discussion about what actually constitutes Article 5 and what is the range of reactions that we are willing and able to invoke. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And I'd love to come back in the Q&A about what you call the cumulative approach and what we are to expect next, because that seems to me quite important to know. But for now, let's move on actually to the Russian side of things with Stefan, and perhaps you can help us decipher a little more the Russian logic behind these attacks, contextualize this a little bit, perhaps also look inside Russia's system at this moment in time. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Jan, and also thanks to the colleagues. I think a lot of elements have been already said, and I will try to bring different perspectives a little bit together and make 5 very short points. So I think the first point is, and I think my colleague Andras Rasch has said this here already several times also in this morning briefing, that the character of the war has changed. Russia has scaled up the amount of drone production tremendously with the support of Chinese companies, has also improved technology. We have a very different design now of drones, but we have also a very different amount. Russia can use drones, and I think...
You can speak. What do you want?
Sorry?
Sorry, can you please keep your microphones muted in the audience? Thank you. Go on, Stefan.
Yeah, so it has really here changed in a way this war, and I think we will not see a winter break also in Ukraine, which is very tough for Ukraine because of this drone war. So while Russia has made its homework in terms of mobilization, scale of drones, missiles, and tactics also changed, Ukraine does not have the people, the money, and the production capacities to complete. And Kiev has lost its advantage it had some time ago in this drone war. And if the war is going on like it is now going on, Kiev will lose more and more because Russia is more and more scaling up in what it is doing. And I think for us, it's really crucial to invest in Ukrainian defense industry, to scale up production inside of Ukraine and change also this growing asymmetry in this war. I just wanted to make this point first. The second point is Russia is not preparing a big war with NATO at this point. I think that we should be very clear. But it is increasingly testing the ability to act of NATO on its eastern front lines and including also the Baltic Sea with hybrid attacks. I think the drone attack on Poland was a next step in testing the reaction and the abilities of NATO to react. And I think it's not the first time that we have seen drones falling down also in Poland. But I think this was really a new stage also. And I think it's also about dividing transatlantic relations, European countries in their mutual solidarity. So it's testing here how we react and support each other. And I think that went quite well. But we also have to see this attack in the context of the Zapad exercise. I think it's not a coincidence that it happened nearly at the same time, because both should raise insecurity and uncertainty among the NATO allies. And I think Zapad is something which happens every 4 years. So it's not just happening now because of the war. I think we should be also here clear. The scale was much smaller. Very interesting that Indians this time, at least in a small scale, participated. But this is a lot about messaging and putting us under pressure. And I agree here with Justyna. Moscow is especially monitoring how Washington, how the Trump administration is reacting, how supportive they are, and where are the cracks maybe also in the US support. I would even add two more elements of this of what Russia is doing here also in the context of these drones. I think on one hand in Moscow they think there was a NATO enlargement, but NATO did not prepare sufficiently to defend its eastern flank, and I think we will see increasingly tests of Moscow on this eastern flank of NATO, and I think the second message here also is we will have to spend more on ourselves, our own defense, and cannot spend this on Ukraine. I think these tests we will see also in the future should raise this insecurity on our side, that we rather invest in our own defense than in Ukraine. Third point is Russia has a broader strategic perspective of its war against the West. And I repeat this, Moscow is in a war with us, also with Europe, with Germany, with the West since more than 10 years. I think this has been defined from the Russian side. This is a hybrid war on our borders, but also within our countries. And drones are now an additional element also of this war. At the same time, Moscow is linking the different regional theaters with each other. And I think it's no coincidence, again, that while it happened something in Poland, also in Romania, we had drones on the territory. I think it's often about attacks in Ukraine, which go through Romanian territory. But since there is no reaction, Russia is using also Romanian territory to attack Ukraine. And I think we have to understand that the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea theaters are, from a Russian perspective, interconnected. And I think we will see more attacks at the same time from the Russian side in different theaters, testing NATO in different theaters and our ability to act.
Can I ask you to be brief in your last points?
So maybe let's focus a little bit on Russia inside as a last point. I just wanted to talk also about how Russia, the regime. I think we see that the regime has is consolidating itself around the war, with power shifts in the elite, cleaning the system from people who might not be loyal enough. Step by step, Putin is replacing the old elite with whom he came to power with a younger generation and a more radical elite of technocrats. We see the cleaning of the system with robust methods, and according to independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta, there have been 56 deaths of successful business people and officials under strange circumstances since February 2022, since the war has started. I think this is a method which we know from the Stalinist past, exactly the direction where the country is further moving with repressions, disinformation, and aggressive ideology. Many people on the federal and regional level, but also in the Ministry of Defense, for instance, in security institutions, have been jailed under corruption charges. And we have to understand that corruption is system immanent. So everybody is corrupt in the system. And only in June and July this year, around 140 officials and bureaucrats at the medium and high ranks have been arrested, mostly on corruption cases. So we see really a cleaning of the system. We see that people benefiting from the war. And my thesis is really that the regime needs the war, needs an ongoing war in different kind of, so there are different options also where war is. But I think there is a transformation going on of the system, which is very much driven by this war, which will make it very difficult for us also in terms of negotiations, in terms of finding any compromises with the regime, if we're not fulfilling the maximum demands of the regime with regard to Ukraine.
Thank you, Stefan. Let's start entering the Q&A section of this morning briefing, and let me kick it off with two brief follow-up questions. One for Justyna, because you mentioned Polish society and the way in which it reacts to these attacks. And perhaps you could say a few more words about why you think that this doesn't help to unite, but remains in a very polarized and difficult situation, even at a time of external attack. And the other question, quick follow-up, because Patrick, you also mentioned your attention procurement, and I see a first question in the chat by Georg Baumgarten about this relationship between the speed, the costs, and the kind of weapon procurement needed now. So perhaps you could say a few words about that, starting with Justyna and then Patrick on procurement after that.
I think that we have first learned that Russia is able to start social or disinformation propaganda campaigns in the Polish social media of the magnitude that we haven't known until now. The magnitude of the disinformation was really something we didn't know, and on every level, the state, the authorities in the government, in the ministries, have engaged in countering false narratives. Why Polish society is susceptible? I think we have overlooked in Poland partly Russian disinformation and propaganda because we thought we are immune. We thought that we are immune to any pro-Russian narratives in our social media, and we are, but we are not susceptible to anti-Ukrainian narratives. And I think these Russia have been used in the past years, and I think they went a bit under the radar and were aggravated by the Polish-Ukraine bilateral problems. And what we experience now with the rising anti-Ukrainian moods in Poland is simply the consequence of that. And I think the Russians have also used some mistakes in strategic communication, also from the Ukrainians, because we need to go back to 2022 autumn. And the first incident with a missile in the Polish airspace that killed 2 Poles. In effect, or after consideration, that was a Ukrainian air defense missile that simply took a different path and landed in Poland while defending Ukrainian airspace. And the Ukrainians have claimed for a long time, and I'm not sure they have changed the narrative, that was a Russian missile attacking Polish airspace, and that should have had consequences in terms that Poland should do much more, or even and NATO should be much more engaged in the defense of the Ukrainian airspace. And Russians are using right now such narratives, showing to the Poles that maybe it were Ukrainians that somehow made the Russian rockets, Russian drones in this case, to divert to Poland and to hit Polish airspace. Or maybe these were Ukrainian drones that were sent to Poland in order to engage Poland in the war in Ukraine. And therefore, because we have had such mistakes in communication also from the Ukrainian side, Russia is basing its disinformation propaganda campaigns on this. And surprisingly, this is successful. And I think the Polish government, different instances, also my institute, are now engaging in counter-propaganda actions. Mm-hmm. We have our social media department. We are quite active in the social media. And now we have produced films why these were Russian drones and not Ukrainians. Explaining to the Polish public why from the technical military level, this couldn't have been Ukrainian drones or anything else.
Patrick.
Thank you, Jan. Mr. Baumgarten, you built on the point of defense economy. You elaborated on that, saying that in Germany we are too slow and costly in building our weapons, and that this is mostly due to technological perfectionism, but also to bureaucratic overregulation. I fully agree with your point. I think there is something to it, especially if you compare it with the war economy in Ukraine, the way that they have developed their own capabilities of drone production and weapons production, ammunition production overall. I think there is much to learn there for us. But at the same time, I think we need not overlook what is happening in Germany. I think the defense industry is shifting gear, has been shifting gear for at least 2 years now, and many things are happening there, especially with the induction of new companies who bet on new technology, companies such as Helsing or Quantum Systems and many others, who focus on drones, AI, also space-based capabilities. And I think they are developing the right stuff, if you will. And it's important to integrate them more closely into what we already have. And this is not to belittle the effort of the bigger companies. If you look at Rheinmetall or Airbus Defence and Space, you can see that they have shifted the way they work and they develop and the way they interact with the armed forces and with the political decision makers, that things are at least moving in the right direction there. Some of the more established companies are even partnering now with the startup scene. And I think many interesting things are happening there. I think it is important to, push that even further. I think that's one of the tasks that we have here at DGAP, for instance, to build a platform where these circles can meet and where it's, a more public conversation about what is going on in the defense sector and how we can help the relationship to develop between the defense sector, the armed forces, and the political decision makers. Mm-hmm. One more point, Jan, if I may, just very briefly. I wish that the Ministry of Defense, which is very much engaged in that, would increase its public relations effort on the matter, because there are many people doubting that the armed forces are knowing what they're doing. Many people doubt that we are actually procuring the right mix of capabilities. They think we might bet too much on legacy systems or don't spend the money in an effective way. And there is not much public knowledge about what is actually going on there. And I think it's important that the Ministry of Defense talks more and more broadly about their procurement strategy, because it's important to maintain democratic support and legitimacy for the vast amount of money that has been set aside now for exactly that new procurement strategy.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Defense industry is in fact one of the points that you focus on in your center. Integrated defense or whole of society approaches, which is being mentioned by Jörn Eichhorn in the chat, is another one that you will focus on in your work in the Center for Security and Defense at DGAP. So I wonder if you can say a few more words about that question as well. But before you do that, I want to bring in Stefan again, following up on a question by Joanna Karl, who's asking about the narrative dominance here. Is the West rather reacting to Russia's way of trying to shape the narrative? Now, it's, I guess, in the very nature of your job, Stefan, that you watch Russia, and then if you tell us about the Russian logic and strategy here. But I wonder if you could also tell us about any potential ways in which the West could actually reach a kind of narrative dominance. What sort of steps would make an impression on both the Russian leadership and perhaps the Russian population, if at all?
I think we have to say that the disadvantage in a way of democracies is that you have a pluralistic discourse, and that you are by nature in a way also vulnerable to this kind of disinformation campaigns. If you look into the Russian system, the state owns the public discourse. So I think there are no alternative discourses. There are no alternative analysis to what's going on in Ukraine, what Russia is doing. Because the state completely controls these narratives. They don't have to argue towards the societies. As Patrick also said, we have to argue, we have to explain to our societies why we spend so much money on defense and maybe not on social issues or on other issues. In Russia, you don't have to do this, yeah? And I think this is in a way, you can say, a big disadvantage. And I think I'm also not sure how easy it will be to counter these narratives. I think, sure, we should explain with our expertise what is really going on, what kind of regime we have, what's happening in Ukraine, why things are important. But it's such a polarized public discourse in which we are. And I think this is also what Russia observed. European democracy is getting weaker. Yeah, so we see the crisis in France. We see even in Poland a discourse which is Ukraine critical. I think this is really rising. This is something which have not been in such a case years ago. But also in the German context, you have parties who are distributing also Russian narratives. So I think it's very difficult to go ahead of the narratives, or I don't think this is possible. But I think what is crucial is to explain. I think it's crucial to show leadership, to show solutions, to challenge Russia in Ukraine. I think this is what we always say, but I think Russia will only understand that it has to change its policy when it's getting too costly in Ukraine. I think that's the only way to stop it. And it's not a regime which will make compromises. It's a win-lose regime. Yeah, it's a win-lose system. There is no win-win for both sides. So in a way, Russia has to lose. And I think we are capable also to support Ukraine, to invest in Ukraine in a way that it will be more costly for the Russian regime. They have an economic crisis. So I think it's much more about action. It's much more about showing strength, topping up our abilities also on the Eastern front line, reacting maybe also more tough on these kind of Russian attacks, on Russian hybrid attacks in the Baltic Sea, stopping the shadow fleet. These kind of things, they will work, and this will also show to our own people that we are able to act.
Thanks, Stefan. Patrick, in addition to the question about integrated defense, there's another one that came in by Thomas Wiegold, who's asking about NATO's integrated air defense and the extent to which NATO member states are allowing this to become a national issue once again. And I noticed your hand going up as well, Justyna. So Patrick first, and then over to you.
Shall I address the point of national resilience and integrated security, or just the integrated air defense?
Feel free to pick up both if you can.
Okay, I'll take up the next half hour. Justyna made the very interesting remark about the reaction in Polish society to the drone incident. And I think this underlines once more that security and even defense are not just an issue and a task for the armed forces alone. It has to go beyond the armed forces. And this is a big change in thinking, especially for German society. We tended to outsource our security to people who were paid to do that. But otherwise, we didn't care. This is not how it works. It did not work that way during the Cold War, and it certainly doesn't work that way nowadays. We need to prepare to be more resilient and need to protect our energy grid, make sure that we have hospitals up and running in times of crisis, even in times of war. It's a large topic. We could talk a lot about this, but just to mention one thing. Of course, there have been preparations. Just look at the Plan Deutschland, the planning by the Bundeswehr on how to make sure that the rear area is functioning in times of crisis, in times of of war and defending our country. But this Plan, for instance, it's largely secret. Hardly anyone knows about it. The individual actors, the civilian actors, do not necessarily know what they are supposed to do, and this needs to change. We need to have a much broader public debate about this, so that we can get all the actors on board that will play a role in defending our country in times of crisis. That's on integrated security. On the integrated air defense, Thomas, excellent point. You're absolutely right. It should be a NATO issue and not a national issue. And we have been, in the past, we have been farther than we are today. What is happening now is, I think, a political reaction to the US largely having left the room. When the United States is not pushing NATO agenda and is not firmly on board with developments on the military side, is reluctant to engage, leaves it to the Europeans. This is exactly what we see then. Then we have a reversion to more national approaches. And I think this is the key task for the Europeans. Again, Berlin as the largest country in the heart of Europe, yada, 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 you know all the story. Berlin has a particular responsibility to not let this become a national issue alone. And I, for one, I'm a bit encouraged by what I see by Eastern Century and the way the nations work together, but it's not the same as what we really need.
That's perfect, Justyna.
From my perspective, I think that NATO reacted correctly, and the NATO integrated air defense system actually works. And we were, after the incident, after we knew that Dutch F-35s that were integrated, that were actually a part of a NATO support and training mission for Ukraine, reacted and shot down the planes. We tried to know or comprehend how the NATO structures and Polish common structures work together. I'm still not sure. I will clear that next week. But what is known is that Polish operational headquarters had the say, but it was closely coordinated with NATO command structures with regard to the Air Force, KAOK in Udem, and then the NATO Air Force Command in Ramstein. And these actions were coordinated, but the Polish operational headquarters had the say. And under the Polish operational headquarters, the Dutch F-35s were subordinated. And I think this is the effect of previous planning and coordination and scenarios that were discussed and agreed and pre-agreed within NATO system. And in the peace times that we have now, I think it's the national structures that take a lead with the support of NATO. And I think we probably within NATO, there were pre-agreed plans for such situation where it was agreed that it will be the Polish operational headquarters that will have a decisive voice. But we were supported by NATO AWACS, by Dutch F-35s, by German Patriot systems in Jasionka. So it worked well, and it was a coordinated system. So I think you don't hear the voices in Poland that it was a national action and national reaction, and NATO did not work. What we hear and what I see and can confirm that it was a close, coordinated operation and reaction from Poland and NATO.
A quick two-finger reaction by Patrick, but please keep it quick because there are more questions coming your way.
Yeah. Justyna, you're absolutely right. It worked this time around, the NATO integrated the system, but it worked at a cost that is not sustainable and not effective. And I think the question was more directed towards what are we building now for the future? And what we are building for the future when it comes to air defense is largely left to the nations at the moment, or the nations took it for themselves. It is not built in a way where interoperability and a common effort are front and center. And I think that's the problem.
Here, if I may, because this is Polish-German then context, agreed. And I think here we need some joint projects, especially between Poland and Germany, in a difficult Polish-German bilateral relations. That could be something that we can bring forward. Air defense in terms of anti-drone defense, Germany supporting Poland, and in a very visible way, military, financially, and that could contribute to clearing a bit, at least, the difficult questions in bilateral relations.
Johannes Regenbrecht in the chat is asking about the US response, or rather the absence of a clear response from the United States. I think President Trump tweeted something like, "What's with Russia violating Polish airspace?" And that was about it. So what about the absence of a clear response, and what does that mean for the EU? Could have reacted better. Will Putin thus be encouraged to repeat such attacks? That's the question by Johannes Regenbrecht. And there's another question by Gudrun Domitheit in chat, also picking up on a Baltic country idea of building a drone wall along the eastern front of Europe. And she's asking about details and how realistic a drone wall might be. I would like to pick up a third question by Klaus Wittmann. Over to you.
I have three quick remarks, and I apologize if I repeat something that was already said because I was cut off for a few moments. I also apologize for my picture. I don't know why I am upside down. Now, I want to say the following. I am not surprised that Russia does things in the gray zone short of clear-cut Article 5 cases, sowing confusion in NATO, where unity is important. And in this case, Slovakia and Hungary readily adopted the Russian narrative about the incident. That is bad. And we should avoid also playing down what I would call an armed attack. And NATO reacted okay procedurally. But the problem, that is my second remark, is hardware. And we urgently need systems like the Oerlikon Rheinmetall Sky Ranger, of which Germany last year in February commissioned 19 systems. And experts say we and others, and for that matter also Ukraine, need hundreds of these systems, and drastic acceleration with the industrial production is needed, although I agree to what Patrick said about this. And thirdly, we must step up military support for Ukraine. They are fighting the war which we do not yet have to fight. And forever so much air defense will not be enough for Ukraine. They need to hit launching sites, military airfields, etc., on Russian soil. Taurus is still needed and the permission to use it there. But also the Russian drone production. And the main site is about 1,200 kilometers away from Ukraine. That is Alabuga in Tatarstan. And that is even too far for the Taurus. So my question perhaps to Stefan is, do you know how far the Ukrainians have got with the Flamingo cruise missile, which allegedly has a range of 3,000 kilometers? And could that in the near future be the means of hitting the Russian drone production?
Thank you, Mr. Wittmann. So we've got a question about US absence, drone wall, and capabilities of Flamingo missiles. Stefan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I keep the drone wall. I'm not a specialist on this, maybe to the colleagues. I just wanted to add one point, maybe a little bit indirect, what Justyna said. I was last week at the ambassadors conference speech of Merz and Wadefuhl also in Berlin. And I was, to be honest, a bit surprised that Poland was not mentioned once by neither by Wadefuhl nor by Merz. So there was a strong focus on the E3, on the UK and France, which I completely understand, but I could not understand why from the top leadership from the German side, Poland has not been mentioned. I think which is a key partner on our eastern flank and also in creating this new European column of NATO. And I think it's for me really a question how serious this government in Germany is about building these special relations at the same time with France and with Poland. And I think this is something also to discuss, and this is also very important in this context. On Flamingo, I don't know exactly the details. I think what I know is that it's there, but the problem is mass production. So I think they have the prototype. They have the first. It's functioning. They've tested it. It will. I think this is also the German idea. We don't need the Taurus because the Flamingo is coming, and the Ukrainians can do it by themselves. In a way, but I think what we need is scaling up. Again, I said this also before, we need really to invest in production in Ukraine, that they can scale up production of this missile, but also of drones and others. And I think this is a core target of Germany and other European countries, really, that and the EU maybe also. There I would see a role of the EU, yeah. to channel also funding for Ukraine defense industry.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, there are many parallel themes now in our conversation. Let me just pick one, and that's the European Union. The reaction and the question about whether that was sufficient and adequate and fast enough. I think it is important to note that, as we've said here in our presentations, it is important to note that Putin is not testing the EU. Putin is testing Trump and the resolve of NATO as a defensive alliance. So it is not really that important how the EU reacts in comparison to NATO. Now, I know that's almost heresy to say it that clearly, but I think from Putin's point of view, that's the case. Having said that, it is important that the EU shows as much unity as is possible with the given constraints. And I think the reaction was quite good and favorable, because what the EU can do is facilitate the defensive effort of the member states within NATO by certain measures such as SAFE, providing money, providing ideas, facilitating the bureaucratic process, and so forth. If the EU is playing such a role as a supporter of a common defense, especially with regard to NATO planning and NATO targets, then I think it is very welcome. And this leads to the drone wall idea, which I think is not something that the EU can organize or should organize, but it is something that the EU can help build, and then leave it to the member states or NATO to implement it and to have it on the eastern flank. On the way on how to actually build such a drone wall, I would point to the comment by Rainer Meyer-Zumfelde in the chat, because what he said is that we shouldn't fantasize too much about something that we do not have yet, but that we need to think about the right mix of, defensive efforts. It will not be sufficient to just invest in drones there, but I think he can say it himself much better. I think he raised his hand in the conversation anyhow, and I know that there are people in the audience who know more about drones and how to build an effective drone wall or not than me. I know that my colleague Emil Archambault, for instance, is also here with us, so maybe there are others who can contribute to that.
And I encourage Emil to come forward and add if you want to, Emil. But Justyna, you also raised your hand, so please feel free to comment.
I wanted to add something to what Stefan said about the lack of Poland and the conference in the Chancellor Merz's speech in the Foreign Office. That has been noted in Poland, and I think many has raised some questions. And another problem was the German reaction after the drone incidents. For me, it was weird why Chancellor Merz reacted so late. It was actually the last reaction to this incident from the biggest and from the closest Poland's partners. He was not present in the video conference or small discussion on this incident that was staged by the Prime Minister in the E5 format. And only after that, there was a conversation with Germany and the Netherlands. And from a Polish perspective, I think that was something unexpected. I think we would expect that Germany would be much more active in denouncing the Russian attacks very early on with France. I think what we have seen was a very active French reaction to this incident. France has sent to Poland very quickly Rafale fighters, very quick comments from President Macron. Such strategic communication matters in military terms and in political terms. And it's important to note that. But I would like to focus on the lack of the US reaction and this uncertainty about the US. What can we do about that? We need simply to be much stronger in our European answer to such incidents. And this European answer shall go beyond defensive measures, but include all the elements that have been mentioned before, helping the Ukrainians to strike Russian drone facilities, airfields in Russia, extending possibly or shooting down Russian drones and Russian missiles in Ukrainian airspace from NATO territory. This is what Russia is fearing. And I think we should go in this way in order to show them our resolve, and that their behavior, aggressive behavior, have consequences. Otherwise, we shall expect more of such incidents moving the borders of what is accepted.
Thank you so much. We only have a few minutes left, but perhaps, Emil, you can say 2 sentences about the most effective ways to counter these drone attacks. Over to you, Emil.
Right. Good morning. Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you, Patrick. Yes, the idea of a drone wall is something that is very much in the media, in public discourse at the moment. I think as a concept, it is something that is very catchy. Now, the devil will be in the details. At the moment, what is needed, as Patrick, Justyna, and Stefan repeatedly said, is investment in systems that can be more reliable in countering drones and doing it at scale as well, and at a price that is affordable. It is true that when there is an emergency, we don't want to think about money, but if this is supposed to be a long-standing defense system, then it has to be manageable from a financial perspective in the long term as well. At the moment, I know that in Ukraine, there is a lot of investment, a lot of research into more reliable means of countering Geran or Shahed attacks by using, for instance, interceptor drones. We saw at the DSEI, the large arms congress in London last week, a lot of companies put out concepts for this. These are, however, still concepts and experimental systems, and they can be fielded very quickly in Ukraine, but going from there to a system that could reliably cover the eastern flank of NATO is still quite a long time away. So perhaps it is a solution in the medium term, but it is certainly not the only solution. And it is also, I would end on this, not the way NATO generally prepares to fight wars as a strictly defensive measure. NATO generally would prefer, as Justyna just said, to prepare for strikes more in depth, to strike the source of attacks, not the endpoint of attacks. So that would be quite a change also in how NATO sees its role. Thank you.
Thanks, Emil. And Emil's research here at the German Council of Foreign Relations, DGAP, is highly recommended if you want to read up more on the technical details of drone warfare. If you want to hear more about German foreign security policy and the questions that we discussed today, please tune in the next time for our morning briefing series. I'm sorry that we weren't able to pick up all questions in the chat this time, but I'm afraid we are at the end of our 60-minute morning briefing today. So once again, a round of applause for our speakers today. This was really insightful and helpful in the light of very serious attacks. And nonetheless, I wish you all a very pleasant day. Thanks and bye-bye.